Hi, this is Travis Apple, Chief Revenue Officer of Logitix, and I'm going one-on-one with ADC Partners.
Hey, this is Dave Almy of ADC Partners, and thanks for checking in on this latest episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. As always, really appreciate you stopping by. If you like what you hear, please take a second to rate or review the show. It's always greatly appreciated. Now, from the outside looking in, working in sports can seem pretty glamorous, I suppose. You know what I mean? Multi-billion-dollar media rights deals, major events located in sparkling new stadiums and global capitals around the world, new companies focused on delivering sports in totally different ways, mushrooming up all over the place. Yeah, all right, it can seem pretty sexy. But the success of everything I just described rests on the back of two things that are absolutely indispensable in sports business: the humble event ticket and the ability to sell that humble event ticket. And few people know more about the importance of those two things than my guest in this episode, Travis Apple, the Chief Revenue Officer of digital ticketing platform Logitix. Travis has spent his working life honing the craft of ticket sales for teams in the NBA, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League, and more. And now with Logitix, he's taking that knowledge and combining it with new tools that make sure teams are getting the absolute most revenue from their ticketing programs. In our conversation, Travis talks about his career arc and drops some legendary industry names that have mentored him along the way. He touches on the transition from working for sports to working with sports at Logitix and how that company is altering the ticketing market. He also takes time to drop more essential sales wisdom than any 35-minute podcast should have. So thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Travis Apple, the Chief Revenue Officer of Logitix. All right, Travis, you came up through sports business literally the old-fashioned way, like the way that almost everybody I know has done, which is coming up through ticket sales. Right. So, and you did it with the Atlanta Spirit. And so, first of all, I don't know if many people are still familiar with the Atlanta Spirit, but I want to hear, given where you are today, what are the lessons you learned selling ticket sales in those early days that you still find relevant even today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to your point on Atlanta Spirit. I always joke because it's the Atlanta Hawks and the Atlanta Thrashers and the Time Phillips Arena. I typically have to take it off my resume because nobody knows who the Atlanta Thrashers are. But I think, a couple of things I learned. One, the value of mentorship, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I was surrounded by some really, really strong people that invested in my career. But from a true sales end, and this is kind of my career as a whole, it all came down to hustle and effort. I knew I didn't come into the sales environment having the most experience, but I wasn't going to let anybody outwork me, make more phone calls, set more meetings. But ultimately, sales, no matter what, is about relationships.
Yeah, boy.
We are selling, especially when you're selling sports, hospitality, and entertainment, it can't be a transaction. It's not a need. People are utilizing their discretionary dollar or their entertainment budget. And so it all comes down to building relationships and truly assessing. I was taught long time ago, 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. Do twice as much listening as you do talking. And so just listening to people and understanding, what their ultimate value proposition is. And I still hold that every single day, whether it be one-on-one conversations or selling, Logitix to rights holders or resellers as well.
The Thrashers and Atlanta Spirit, Bernie Mullins running that place, great leadership team back there in the day. So absolutely, that first part about mentorship, when you are surrounded by people who have a solid understanding or a great background in this business, it's amazing what you can absorb. And the second thing is, man, we have a guy, Brian Deerling, used to sell partnerships for the San Jose Sharks back in the day. And he had a great statement. He said, nobody ever got fired for not buying the Sharks, right? And it's such a great point, right? This is discretionary dollars. So you have to really open your ears and listen to what people are saying. It's fundamental to almost every kind of sales, but probably no more than sports, right? I mean, it has to be more in sports than just about anywhere else.
And I've seen it time and time again, whereas if you're asking the right assessing questions and getting them to understand it, they'll walk themselves right into a partnership or into a sales. And the amount of times whether it be my own self or my team, they come back and they're like, how'd it go? I'm like, they bought, and I barely even said anything. I didn't feel like I had to sell them. You're like, exactly. You don't have to sell anything. You walk through the value proposition. I always say, like, there's two value propositions. You, as the seller, has a value proposition, and the customer has one. Your job is to marry them together.
How do you find those two and where they mesh? And so you took that fundamental experience working for the Atlanta Spirit, and then eventually you ended up at Teambo, NBA's team and I always get the acronym, Team Marketing Business Operations, Teambo. Everybody just knows this is Teambo. You don't nobody needs me to break it down for you. And the thing that's amazing about Teambo to me is executive ranks in sports business are just like they're littered with people who have Teambo experience. So what is it about Teambo? Like what was your experience there? What was that like? And what's happening in there that creates this sort of incubator
Yep.
for people who go on to do big things in sports business?
I go back to even the mentor talk, and you talked about, Dr. Bernie Mullen
Mm.
was at Atlanta Spirit. He started, Teambo with a great mentor of mine, Lou DePauli, who was in Atlanta and Pittsburgh, Dr. Bill Sutton, who's been a great mentor of mine, and and the list goes on and on to your point. And I think what is great about Teambo is it's all about sharing best practices. But every week when I was in a new market, whether it be an NBA team, a WNBA team, or a G League team, you're surrounding yourself with the who's who of the sports industry. You're meeting with top execs at a variety of franchises that are challenging you just as much as you're challenging them. And I think to your point, you talk about, like, a lot of people say the masters and things. In Teambo, you really get a master's in a little bit of everything. Like, prior to me joining Teambo, I spent majority of my career in the ticketing landscape, ticketing and premium and sales. When you at Teambo, yes, that was still a big part of it, but I also have to meet with the CMOs, the heads of marketing and digital and HR and finance, to just better understand that business, so you can be truly looked at as a thought leader regardless of topic. And I think, to your point, and that's what Teambo has done such a great job of, is, as you can imagine, every day, every call you're on, every meeting you're on, you are literally with top executives of NBA, W, and G League franchises, which goes a long way. Kind of going back as long as you're open to learning.
Yeah, again, it goes back to keeping those ears open. It's funny too, you brought up relationships when we first started talking and the importance of them in the sales process. But I think sometimes people forget, right? That relationship piece is so critical to what you are and where your path is going to take you. So when you have those opportunities to engage with people throughout the NBA and the G League, or no matter where you're going, how you keep your ears open and combine that with establishing a long-term relationship with those people is absolutely critical, particularly in a small business like sports. It kind of seems big because it's very high profile. But I mean, there's like six people who run this whole thing.
Yeah, it's a full circle. I always kind of joke with you, if you think about LinkedIn and the first and second degree connections.
Yeah, yeah.
Few times in that sports world and that sports circle of trust are you ever getting to that third degree connection. If you're not first degree, you're second degree by hundreds of people.
Right. So go out, everybody, and start getting your LinkedIn prepared and like start just sending those invites right
Yeah.
now to everybody because you got to be first level. All right. So Teambo kind of broadened your perspective a little bit, right? Ticket sales was sort of the crux of where everything started. It's the heart of where, like we talked about, so many people started, and but you did work for just a huge number of sports franchises, right? Sort of accelerating as you went on through, right? The Suns and the Marlins and Thrashers we talked about, Hawks and the Magic. So huge amount of team experience. Seems like you are on this trajectory to head on that. But you pulled an audible, right?
Yep.
You left the team side, and now you're chief revenue officer for Logitix, a pretty significant ticketing platform for sports and entertainment properties. So as you make that transition, what was that like as you move from selling for sports teams and now you're selling more or less for a technology company? Actually, not more or less, just a technology company.
It is, yeah.
Um, what did you have to relearn?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is not only you're relearning and continuing to hone your own craft
Yeah,
and
yeah.
your own skill set. But I think more importantly, and even prior to joining Logitech, say you had run and operated a training and recruiting company. But the beauty of that, and then now leading into Logitech, is, to your point, I've spent more of my career in that team chair, in that league chair, than I have in this tech space. So you talk about listening. It's not me trying to sell a technology. Most of the time when I'm in, or actually all the time, when I'm in the conversations, I understand
Mm,
the struggles, the challenges they're facing on the other side of the chair. Like I understand when, hey,
yeah.
I know you're going to go into this owner meeting and they're going to say, it's not is volume or yield more important. It's both. Whether it's a Tuesday game or a Saturday game, you've got to figure out how to maximize revenue and increase attendance. And so I think that transition has been good because I've always told people like you're not a salesperson, you're a consultant. And the big difference, right? Salespeople just come in and they just start force feeding a product. We would have zero success at Logitix. We came into every rights holder, every reseller, and said, "You need to utilize our technology. We're perfect. We're awesome. Boom, boom, boom." We've got to truly understand, again, going back to that value proposition and that needs analysis to identify what's most important. And so I think that's the big thing. And that's a big competitive advantage of us at Logitix is that majority of us have spent time, on the team side. So
You've been in the trenches.
we understand the struggles. We understand
The
that
struggle is real.
let's call a spade a spade. The owners are aggressive and they
Yeah.
want more. And so we see the value in that.
Yeah, they didn't come to being owners by being shy and retiring in anything that they do, right? They're competitive. They're competitive with the 30 plus other owners within their league, and and nobody wants to be in the bottom half of the grouping or anything like that. Did the pace of technology and working for technology take you a little bit by surprise? Not that the pace of working for a pro sports franchise is slow by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, technology is kind of its own animal. Was there a cultural adaptation you had to do?
I think in a couple different ways, right? And it depends on how you look at it. It could be
Yeah,
positive or negative. You go from a team side where you're having, games and events. You go from a Major League Baseball season, 81 games, 13
right.
weekends. You have a 10
Oh
game
yeah.
and I think on one end it's like, okay, now maybe I'm not at the stadium or the ballpark every night for a game, but as we have so many rights holders and so many tickets that are going through our pipes, you always have to be on. So a lot of people think about and kind of misconceptions like, oh, if I get off the team side, I don't have to work as many games.
Just a nine to
Yeah,
five.
you know what? Yeah, you're right. You're probably not at a stadium, but you're still in front of your computer. It seems like 24/7 at times. But I think tech in general, right? This conversation, and if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would I ever work for a tech company? I'd be like, absolutely not. Like, that's crazy. But how tech has continued to evolve, and
Yeah.
now you're on the outside looking in. If you aren't involved in tech, if you aren't working through and understanding the technology space, and again, that's not a sales pitch on Logitech, that's tech in general, because there are so many tech firms that if you're not utilizing them, and I'm sure we'll talk at some point in time about AI.
Yeah.
I think every person out there, if they're not using AI, they're crazy.
If you're not preparing our computer overlords to take these jobs from us right now, you better start getting ready for it.
Yep.
And it's interesting too when we talk about technology in sports business. I think it's fair to say, like, other than media, right? Media's changed completely with streamers and evergreen clips and things like that. The way people digest sports now has totally changed. But the concept of ticketing is totally different, right? I mean, how people think about ticketing, it's in the last 20 years, it's completely changed. And it seems funny, like it's just a ticket. Like people might be listening and thinking, I mean, it's a little piece of cardboard. Well, I mean, it's not even the cardboard anymore, right? So, can you provide just a high level look for people who are thinking that? Like, what do you mean it's changed a lot? Can you provide a high level look at the industry of ticketing, particularly as it relates to sports, how it's changed? And how that led to basically the birth of Logitix, how Logitix came into the market. Can you? I realize I just basically gave you a 4 volume set. I'm asking you to synopsize, but
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
give me a purview from it.
I think, as you think about some granular pieces of ticketing that have changed so much since I got in the business, one is flexible ticket options. It
Mm,
used to be you're a full, you're a half, you're a partial.
right,
Period, point blank, right? Now there's the flexible banks, the flexible options, the options that you can get via your phone on your app,
right.
things like that. Secondarily, you think about pricing.
Hmm.
20 years ago, it was here's the price. Now, the prices may differ because if you're a full season versus a half season versus a group or a single game. But other than that, it didn't matter if it was a Tuesday or Saturday. It didn't matter if it was first game of the season or last game of the season. It's all static pricing. Right now you have variable pricing, dynamic pricing, day of game pricing, etc. So with that goes into a lot of effects. And as it leads into the ticketing landscape, you even think about, and I kind of joke, like going back to old school days, if we had a very rough around the edges CRM when I started. And so it was like there are times you picked up a yellow book and you started smiling and dialing. I always joke with people like, when I was selling premium seating, like I still had a flip phone and I have to describe what a flip phone is. But now you're texting decision makers,
Yeah.
you're utilizing so many different methods of outreach, which all in all, transitions into why Logitix has been such a successful company, is being able to go back to maximizing revenue and increasing sell through. Because if you utilize what I would consider like man and machine versus
Yep.
man versus machine, you've
Yeah.
got power behind it of your gut of human, but you also are utilizing AI and technology to truly understand and get granular. Because now, as you think about dynamic pricing, it's not just, hey, all of this section is $50. That first row might be 75. That second row might be 72. Row 4 may start at 50, but as soon as 4 seats are sold, it goes up to 55 because of supply and demand and driving urgency and demand. And
Yeah,
so
just drill down to it on a seat by seat basis.
when you can get granular and price by, not just section and row, but actually to the seat, aisle versus middle, you think about those opportunities like that. That's where every organization, and again, whether you're a rights holder or a reseller, if you can get that sophisticated and utilize that technology, you can gain a lot of incremental dollars.
You start carving out dollars in places you might not have ever seen them before.
Going back to working 24/7 365, if you are a reseller or you have inventory on the rights holder side for a variety of games, events, shows, it doesn't matter, and you can start finding a couple dollars for every granular seat, but it's a little bit automated, so it's not just you powering behind the computer. That adds up quickly.
Yeah, and for those people who are listening and now have written down the phrase flip phone and yellow pages, Travis and I come from a different time. It's like we've landed here from an era where there were things that were offline that had value to them.
Yeah.
I would never return to those times. Don't get me wrong. Like nobody wants to get a yellow pages book thrown on their desk and say, "Good luck."
Yeah, smile and dial. Good luck. Now, I will say one of the old school thing is the snail mail. I would encourage everybody listening, like, don't forget about snail mail, because you think about how many pieces of mail you get. Because now, even like what you'd consider like the old school spam mail is usually email now. But you get maybe some bills. Most of those are automated. But the power of handwritten cards, like some of those
God,
things
yeah.
should never go away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will say we have a client the chief marketing officer, who said she gets 750 emails a day. So she has an assistant whose job it is to filter her email. So if you're in sales and relying on email as your primary form of communication, stop. Right? Yeah, I mean, you talked about it.
There was a stat I read, and I used to train on this when I was running sales training, that on an average, an executive would receive over 150 emails a day and only 5 phone calls a day. So as you think about, to your point, like if you're just content being behind the computer sending emails, but somebody is willing to pick up the phone or do something else to get in front of that decision maker,
Yeah,
you're going to get passed up.
yeah,
Eventually,
absolutely.
it's going to happen.
So let's talk a little bit about the technology piece associated with this. I mean, you've already brought up AI a couple times, and I did an interview not too long ago with a guy named Christopher Zook, and he is the CIO of Kaz Investments, and he's one of these leading guys who's doing private equity and owning professional sports teams. And he takes all these professional sports teams and he agglomerates all the information, shares it amongst everything, all the other teams in his portfolio, so they can learn from each other and do all those kinds of things. And he had this quote that was like, look, if teams are not involved in data science, AI, machine learning, they're missing enormous opportunities, right? So this is a guy who is committing literally billions of dollars with that as the underlying intent. So from where you sit at Logitix, right, obviously taking full advantage of the technologies available to you to benefit these teams. Can you talk a little bit about that? the standpoint of how does data science and analytics and how you present them to sports properties, what should they be taking advantage of? Right. I think
Yeah.
maybe variable pricing is getting there, but I mean, it's opening so many doors
Yeah. I
now.
mean, as you think about to that point, right, the value of data and analytics behind anything you do. It used to be everything was kind of
Yeah.
gut.
Yeah.
Like, hey, what's my gut tell me, even if it comes to pricing, 15, 20 years ago, my gut tells me this team is going to drive ticket value once you started getting into dynamic pricing.
Right.
Now you're taking that truly from data and analytics and plugging that into an automated process and system. So we know the buyer curve and the buyer trends, and maybe if it's 7 days out prior to a game, here's typically what it does to pricing. But you need to get really in the weeds and understand, and like that's why historical data is always important.
All right.
I go back and look at like a baseball. Go back and look when that opposing team came in. You want to understand what it did to pricing, but also what was the weather that day. As we
Mm.
know, a lot of these markets, like if it's raining, that might not drive ticket value. If it's a beautiful day, what other events were going on in that marketplace? Right? What was the promotion night? What other added value was to that game that would have drove that ticket price either up or down? And then as you think about like automated and price changes, I mean, you are talking about as it comes closer within like a 72-hour window, you're talking hundreds of price changes. Because
Yeah.
again, you're not price changing, you have 50 seats, you're price changing them all 50. These four might be one price point. Once those four sell, there's another one that triggers a price point. But there's so many things of that. When you think of hundreds of that, I often challenge everybody I come across is what's the return on energy?
Mm.
Everybody talks about return on investment. That is certainly important. But what I would challenge everybody, what's equally, if not more important, is what is your true return on energy? And if you have somebody, and again, whether you are pricing tickets or whether you have somebody on your staff pricing, whatever it may be, if you're sitting behind the computer and trying to identify, all right, how can I make hundreds of price changes? You're probably missing on another task or an opportunity. And that's why that kind of automation and that technology is so important because now I can make price changes at 2 a.m. I'm making price changes at 5 a.m. all because of an automated system and automated technology.
But don't you also then have the system have the capability to say maybe you should consider making a pricing change, right? So it's not just your gut. Now you've got an external gut that can say like, hey, kick your chair a little bit and say, hey, look, it's going to be sunny tomorrow, type stuff.
We've all probably been in situations where you're meeting with your boss or an executive team and they say, well, like, what's the data show? And you're like, and you say something, and they're like, well, what's another data point? And I
Mm.
think that leads into what you exactly said. Like now, not only do you have multiple data points from a computer or machine learning, but also your gut. Now you tie those together, you're going to be pretty accurate. Now, look, in ticket pricing, it's hard to tell. There's think about is there's always articles every day. You think about some large event that's just going to probably crush it, or a concert gets announced, you think it's going to absolutely crush it, but then all of a sudden the market shorts and like it's just not a great show or a great event, or something happens, whether it be with a player or performer that hey, the demand isn't driven.
My bagpiping concert just didn't
Yeah,
sell the way I hoped it
yeah,
would.
didn't go up. Yeah, right. So as you think about that, those are all things you're sitting in that chair. You need to be thinking about and evaluating what are all those goes. Because then also in this business, more than anything, because again, going back to like you need to focus on maximizing revenue and increasing sell through, and it's both on 99.9% of the events. You have to be willing to pivot. And I think that's where I'll never say, hey, you should all go AI, you should all go automated, because you're going to miss some things.
Hmm.
But if you go all just power of a human being, you're definitely going to miss some things. That's why there's got to be that blend.
Yeah, you brought it up, man and machine, right? They have to
Yep.
the perfect fusion of the two around
Yep.
ticket, right?
Exactly.
Maybe we're looking for cyborgs to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Speaking of cyborgs, because there's the only way to really explain him. Logitix was all over the media when Lionel Messi ended up coming to Inter Miami FC, and it's probably a great example of the ultimate variable being inserted into what was sort of a I don't want to call it moribund, but it was a franchise that people weren't really paying attention to. he arrives, and it's a great case study for everything that you're talking about. So, Logitech was in the news quite a bit associated with it. So, can you talk about that specific example and the lessons that other teams can or should learn from something like that when a lightning bolt hits the franchise?
I think a lot of it's that peak on peak mentality, right? Being able to take advantage of it. And I always said, I unfortunately for all the teams I've worked for have a 330 winning percentage, and I have no rings to show for it, right?
Oh,
But
jeez.
you have to always be ready to, kind of really ride the wave when it comes. And I think not only does the Inter Miami organization, but every MLS organization really set themselves up to have a ton of success. And now you think about that is because like, all right, there's some buzz. Now, and if you go in granular team by team, there are certainly teams that capitalize a lot more than others. Because there are some teams that said like, well, maybe I'm concerned. The one thing in ticketing, we just most recently saw this with Caitlin Clark at Iowa basketball as well, right? If you have a little bit of, and I get it, right? There might be some PR concern of backlash of ticket prices going too high. Where my challenge to that always is, if somebody is buying it, that means the price point isn't that crazy. Because at the end of the day, you're never gonna keep everyone happy. You could send me any item right now, and my gut might say it's priced too high, but somebody would probably buy it at that price
Value is very individual.
no matter what. And so as I think about it, now what I always say is like it's great, and most teams can capitalize on that, whether it be Messi or Caitlin Clark coming to town. How do you take full advantage of those potential new buyers? What's your lead nurturing campaign? What's your bounce backs? What's your email journeys to focus on capitalizing on potentially more discretionary dollar, entertainment dollar? Because the value of sports is all about experience, right? Some people may say, oh, I only wanted to come see Messi. But I guarantee if you bring your family and or your clients or employees, there's going to be something else about that game or match that people are like, I want to come back.
Yeah, that
Now
window of
it's up to you
opportunity.
on the team side. And I think that's where I always say is like, look, it's easy. And most teams can capitalize on that one time, kind of that genie in a bottle. It's the teams that are really good are the ways to capitalize further. And then all of a sudden, yep, exactly. It's a domino effect then, right? And I think that's the big piece. Because then the other thing is, look, this came up last year. There was a couple matches that Messi didn't play in. So now you're going to have some frustrated, upset potential buyers. They're like, I spent all this money last year. You didn't even play. You've got to be able to pivot and understand how to continue to lead nurture of just, hey, of that experience, what did you enjoy most? If I ask your clients, if I ask your kids, and then utilizing that technology as well of like, how do you continue to leverage the ultimate that get price point that people are just excited about?
It's important to look at that ticket as not the end, but the means to create so many more opportunities to engage that customer, right? That's just literally getting them through the gates the first time. What's that journey? I love, the talk you're talking about that fan journey. It's such an important way to think about this, their experience, all the touch points as they go through the stadium and have the experience. And maybe it didn't work out exactly the way they wanted to, but what can we get connected with them that's not related to the thing that they're disappointed about, maybe he didn't show up, kind of thing.
Exactly. It's all about the experience. And that's, I always tell people there are very little things that you can control. But the one thing is you can control, your passion, your work ethic, and your coachability. Because everything else, like you can't control wins and losses. You can't control who plays or not plays. You can't control if somebody gets a beer spilled on you. But you can control how you overcome.
I apologize for all the beers I've spilt on people, by the way.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. Those challenges and issues, those are the things you can control.
Yeah, yeah. So as you listen to the decision makers on the team side, I mean, as you're talking to people all the time, every day, what are their, as you hear them, what are they looking at now as being their pressure points, particularly as it relates to the ticketing side of the business? And how is Logitech looking at those unique pressure points and saying, okay, this is either a shift in the service or a new service, or where is this market headed, and how do you address that?
And we could probably talk for hours on those topics, right?
Get ready,
Because
everybody. This is going to be a long one. Buckle
yeah,
in.
there are a lot of pressure points? Are there a lot of points that, owners or executives are challenging their team members to think about? And, I think about just a few things. I think it's, what's your inventory allocation?
Yeah.
How many fulls versus halves versus partials versus groups and individuals? Because if you think about the average ticket price, you're going to gain more average ticket price with more singles, groups, and partials than you are in fulls and halves. But you don't want to put yourself in a situation that 30 or 40% of the games you have a very limited amount of people. So it's understanding inventory allocation, which Logitix we do a lot because we have access to so much data of being able to share and give them a better idea of here's how many fulls you should sell versus partials versus groups versus singles. As we talked about variable pricing and tiering your games. Again, another thing Logitix can assist with and understanding the value of each game. And there are partners of ours that we will help and kind of understand the market before they even go on sale, on the primary to their regular fans, because it's getting them a better understanding of like where can you maximize every dollar you can. As you continue to think about the pain points, it's Tuesday games. How do you sell those out? And
What's
we
old
just
is new
launched
again.
we just launched baseball, right?
Yeah.
And there's a Tuesday game in some of these markets. It might be snowing,
Yeah.
right? But you've got to be able to fill the bowl.
Nothing like baseball in the snow.
Because it's the per cap and things like that. So I think everything, those are as I continue to have conversations every day with top executives across, every big sport and music, performing arts, and even top resellers. Like those are the key points that they're focusing on. And so as I think about Logitix and the technology we have access to a lot of that. And you go back to the return on energy. We have 100-person team at Logitix. If you are asking a rights holder or a reseller, it's like, all right, hey, can you do this? You're going to put probably 30 of our people's jobs into one person's job. And then that's the only thing they're going to be able to focus on. And they still probably won't be able to get to that point. So I think that's where Logitix comes in as a great partner. We want to be the extension of their staff.
Right. So seamlessly integrated into those teams. And as you think about yourself in those early days, doing inside sales and moving tickets for organizations and where you are now, how do you encapsulate that journey for yourself, right? When you think about the person that you were starting out and the person that you are now, what advice would you give him as he was starting his career? Now that we know you know what you know.
I mean, I think, one of the biggest things is again, it's kind of my mantra at all times. It's all about hustle and effort. Making sure you put in the effort. There's an old saying, and everybody hears this is like, hey, it's, I work smarter so I don't have to work harder. And I always challenge people, what if you did both? What if you worked
It's not an
really
either
hard
or.
and you worked really smart? Like
Yeah.
imagine how quick you'd be on that end. And so as I think back to that time, like there were times I don't think I was working that smart. I was always working my tail off and I was pounding the calls. But now knowing about it, like, and now having the technology, I go back to like smiling and dialing, like single game buyers or businesses. I went in and I had no concept who they are. But now with our data and analytics, being able to understand the lead scoring, being able to quickly go back to LinkedIn, search the person on LinkedIn and see, and oh, they went to this school or they worked at this company. Now that's a relationship point. So now I don't have to make any cold calls. That's a warm call. Hey, I'm reaching out and I actually saw on LinkedIn you went to XYZ school or used to work here. Or one of your hobbies is this. What do you like about that? And so now it's more of that relationship based because nobody likes to be sold to, but people love to buy. And so, I think as I go back, early on in my career, I wish I would have worked smarter. And part of it is like maybe we didn't have the technologies, but also now, like now, if you're sitting in that chair of being a salesperson and you're not leveraging Chat GPT and AI, if you're not leveraging LinkedIn, if you're not leveraging all of the information that's out there, the person that's competing with you is going to pass you.
His name is Travis Apple. He is the Chief Revenue Officer of Logitix. Travis, thanks for spending the time. You talked about the importance of controlling what you can control. Well, unfortunately, I'm going to put you in the lightning round, so there's no way you're going to be able to control any of this. I just want to make sure. Are you ready, Travis? Here we go. Some questions
I
that
am ready.
well, we'll see. I mean, this could be chaos. All right, here we go. Are you ready? First one. Okay, with a last name like Apple, do you know anyone named Orange, and are you often compared to them?
I've heard that a lot, right? Travis Orange, Travis Banana.
Yeah.
I don't unfortunately know Apple. One thing I always joke about that is like Apple seems pretty easy. The amount of people that still butcher the name, whether I go to like a dinner reservation or a call in, because I think in people's minds they're like, no chance it's Apple. Is it Appley? Is it Appel? Appelé? And
Oh, I like Appel. That's very continental.
Hey, it is just like the fruit, and unfortunately, I don't own Apple, so I still have my oldest iPhone out there. So
that's a great way to put it, though. He's like, yes, that's my company, the Apple company. All right. You've sold some teams who haven't exactly helped you out in the field. You mentioned a little while ago, a 331 winning percentage. What was your toughest selling season?
I would say probably the toughest, but also the most rewarding. When I was with the Pittsburgh Pirates, we were
I knew you were going to say Pirates.
On pace to be in the 20th straight losing season. That this season it was 18th straight losing season. We went on to lose 107 games, I believe, but we were mathematically eliminated from the playoffs shortly after the All-Star break. And so we were going to launch new sales and renewals, and there was nothing to play for. And Pittsburgh is such a sports market; they'll rally behind the team. But our staff did a great job of digging deep and saying like, "Hey, we're not going to sell wins and losses. We're going to sell the experience at PNC Park," and we had a ton of success. But wow, it was hard because you talked about getting the teeth. Like you had to have thick skin, and there would be times you would make 100 calls. You might get hung up on it 90 times. The other 10 times, they're MFing you. But I
good
thought
times.
The resilience of the team was very good. But it was a challenge. But I think you ask anybody that was on that team how we overcame some of those obstacles and rejections to still have a ton of success, launch into a great season. But that was a tough one when it's August and September. You've got some teams that are playing for playoffs, playing for wild card, whatever it may be, and it's like no chance. We don't have
not happening. Okay. Your book is Hustle Your Way to Success in Sports Sales, currently available on Amazon. What's the one lesson in there that people tend to overlook, you think?
It's a good question. It's been an exciting journey to do that. I think probably the number one thing that I think people overlook, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about, is the value of relationships. Early in the book, it talks about just finding mentors, and as you apply for a job and then ultimately get the job, what should you do? Or once you sell something, people tend to say like once they had an initial conversation or an initial interview or they get the job, the lack of a better term, the thanking them, that individual pass that, or they become a client, the
gratitude
relationship with them is still just lacks. It lacks a lot. And I think that is probably the thing that a lot of people overlook in our industry.
A little follow through. Okay, last one. Your podcast is 52 Weeks of Hustle. It's available on all platforms. I only release this podcast 26 times a year. Do I need to hustle more, Travis Apple?
No, absolutely not. You're doing a tremendous job. And it's perfect. And I always challenge everybody, and I'm sure you do the same. People come to me and like, hey, I want to start a podcast. I'm all for giving them all the good, the bad, the ugly. Look, I would be lying if I'd said at times it's like, what if I did 26 weeks? 52 weeks. There are times I'm traveling, I'm on the road, like, holy shit, like I need to figure out another episode. But no, you're doing a tremendous job, and I appreciate it.
All right, we'll do another one based on the whole podcast thing. Travis Apple, man, thanks very much for spending the time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. If you enjoyed it, we always appreciate a subscribe, share, comment, or like. And don't forget, you can always find past episodes at abcpartners.com/podcast. This podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by Dave Almy. And theme music was composed by Scott Holmes.